Metabolic syndrome is the polite term that a patient is headed towards diabetes. And by the time I diagnose metabolic syndrome, there are a whole bunch of problems happening inside your body, even if you don't feel it or know it yet. Metabolic syndrome means that the blood overflows with insulin for hours and hours a day. And most people never know this is happening. The blood sugar in your body, when it gets too high, is toxic, especially to nerves and brain. And the hero of this story is insulin. He's also the enemy. Our body works to keep glucose within strict limits to prevent this harmful situation. Insulin is the commanding hormone that keeps blood sugar out of that toxic range. Modern eating of processed foods has created an epidemic of metabolic syndrome. Never in the history of mankind have we needed such education to lower blood glucose across the globe. When we eat carbohydrates, your body breaks down those simple sugars into molecules of glucose. That glucose enters into your circulation and triggers the body to stimulate insulin, that hormone in charge of sweeping excessive glucose into cells of your liver, muscle, and fat. Once glucose is inside the cell, it now can be transferred into energy. That energy flows through your mitochondria. And when I talk about shifting chemistry within our body, I'm talking about this little bitty spot inside your mitochondria. When that energy flows through your mitochondria, it is life. And when it stops flowing, it's the opposite of life. You need to know that your circulation can only hold about a heaping teaspoon of sugar. That's about 5 to 7 grams of glucose. Once you eat more than that, insulin comes along to save the day by sweeping that excess sugar, that toxic level of sugar, out of circulation and into the cells that store it. However, the more insulin in circulation, the more likely you are to have metabolic syndrome. The problems of metabolic syndrome start when your body becomes deaf to the insulin knocking at that cellular door. Like any good dictator, if their troops don't listen the first time you tell them, speak louder. And that's what's happening. As that glucose rises, it's chased by insulin. And the cycle continues as your body grows deaf to this signal. In an ICU, we would call this alert fatigue. The noise of a problem is going off hour after hour. And as you live in an environment where the sounds of danger are always present, you can grow deaf to that sound. This problem is happening inside your cells, and eventually they stop letting glucose in those cells at all. So even though your blood sugar is rising gently over the years, the cells inside, that mitochondria, is dying because there's no fuel getting into it. Because the other problem that happens as insulin rose is that it locks your fat cells closed. If glucose can't get into the cell, well, use some fat. But because that insulin is high, fat can't circulate and glucose can't get in the cell. And that's where this chronic elevated insulin starves those cells, creating all these chronic medical problems found in my internal medicine clinic. These are problems like high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, brain fog, autoimmune disorders, increased risk of cancer, and the list goes on. Because the cellular problems are now becoming symptoms, and the symptoms turn into outward problems, and now we have a bunch of pathology. Metabolic syndrome turns into diabetes as the blood sugars slip higher and higher on the range. They should have been in that 70 or 80 range, and as they crept into the 90s, 100s, and 120, we start using the word diabetes when your average blood sugar is close to 130. So with the screaming sound of insulin percolating through every artery in your body, along with that comes these pro-inflammatory markers. Insulin is actually a growth hormone, known for growing fat cells, but also stimulating the growth of many of these other problems. Those pro-inflammatory markers cause things like gout and arthritis and cancer, and all of those problems of the aging person. The reversal of it begins with lowering the insulin. They cannot reverse these chronic medical problems or lose that weight until the insulin comes down. And my favorite way for lowering insulin is a sardine challenge. Check that out here.